Culture is the output of community. Few people understand what this means better than our next guest, Jenny Boyd. To explain who Jenny is, it's best to actually just read the bio from the jacket of her book, Icons of Rock. It reads, Jenny Boyd is a former 60s model and the younger sister of Patti Boyd, who was married to George Harrison and Eric Clapton. Married to Mick Fleetwood twice, Jenny has been immersed in the world of rock and roll since her teens. As a rock star muse, Jenny even inspired Donovan and Mick Jagger to write songs about her, including Donovan's famous hit Juniper. A good friend to the Beatles, she worked at their retail venture Apple Boutique in London. In 1968, she accompanied sister Patti on the band's visit to Rishikesh in India, where they studied transcendental meditation with Maharishi Mahesh Hiyogi. Jenny co-wrote 2 songs for the band Fleetwood Mac, although the group's manager gave the writing credits to her husband, Mick Fleetwood. She earned a PhD in psychology and spent many years running an addiction treatment center in England. Jenny's critically acclaimed memoir, Juniper, was published in early 2023. Wow. Okay. So we came together around the release of this book, Icons of Rock, because we share an interest in the inquiry of this question. Where does creativity come from? And as Jenny has shared her story with me, that has been a bit of a through line for her. So in this conversation, I'm digging into the community level, the human level elements of the creation of a culture that is absolutely mythic to me. You know, I grew up as a musician with a band striving for rock stardom. And that entire story is one that was really burst into being by the story of the Beatles, by the story of Fleetwood Mac. And Jenny was there. That trip to India is the trip that created the White Album. I mean, that is a monumental piece of art and culture. You know, her sister, Patti, is supposedly the inspiration behind the song Layla. That is my sister's name. So there is something deeply synchronistic in our coming together and having a conversation. But for Jenny, these are her friends, her family. For so many around the world, the idea of these things as culture creates a distance from the humanity of what it is that created these inspirations for us. For Jenny to be a part of these scenes, a part of these communities throughout all of her life, and then have the wisdom to pursue a PhD in psychology, to do clinical work for addiction, and to then become an author asking these questions, where does creativity come from, is an absolute gift to all of us. She is providing us with a North Star to understand, how does this happen? How does great art, great culture get made? And in this book, Icons of Rock, in their own words, this is transcriptions of many conversations that Jenny herself has had with incredible luminaries, asking them, what is it that's taking place for you on stage, in the studio, in the writing process? Where does that creativity come from? And that is her gift to all of our benefit. So drop in, give this conversation a listen. This is Jenny Boyd. Which way is north? The first question I want to ask you before we really begin is, how would you like to be referred to in this conversation?
I would like to be referred by my name, Jenny Boyd.
Excellent. Well, tell me a little bit about who Jenny Boyd is.
Jenny Boyd is a writer. Jenny Boyd is my maiden name, and that's what I grew up with. And whenever I've written anything to do with my writing, I always put it under Jenny Boyd, because that's me, who I am, and before I was given the name or accepted the name of my husband.
And for those that are listening at home, what should they know about Jenny Boyd? Where can they find Jenny Boyd?
Well, they can find Jenny Boyd on my website, which is thejennyboyd.com. And I've written a few books, and one was Musicians in Tune, and came out in 92. And then Juniper came out in 2020. And then this recent book that's come out, Icons of Rock in Their Own Words, that came out. In the US. It came out earlier this year, and in England, end of last year.
Brilliant. Well, let's drop into the 7 directions and ask some questions, shall we? The first one for you. What is in front of you?
Well, I thought about this and I wrote it down, but I'm going to read it now. It says, what's in front of me is self-expression. Just for example, having written my book, and now I feel, okay, what's the next chapter? Am I going to write another book? Do I want to write another book? What's going to be next? And so I applied for a place at the Faber Academy from Faber and Faber to write a novel, to learn to write a novel. It's a 6-month course, and you show up every week at the class, and you have to commit to 7 hours writing a week. And I was thinking, well, actually, I don't know if I want to do that. This is like 10 days later, because I feel I would like to do something that feels inspiring to me and that's fun, because I think that's very important when doing something that's creative. If it feels like, well, actually, I don't really even want to write a novel, so why am I challenging myself? I think it's good to challenge yourself, but there's certain things you don't need to challenge yourself on everything. And so I've decided to do something else, and that is to play with what I've written over the years. Lots of little short stories, or little, could be just, I don't know, 20 lines long. So I'm going to do that. And that's what's in front of me. I'm committed, and I can get started I can get started as soon as possible. Just go through all my stories and maybe finish some or add some and just play.
Well, I hear a really interesting dynamic in there between the idea of a challenge and the idea of play. And you're somebody who verifiably has produced a lot of creative work. So I think that you've got a very informed perspective on this. And it very clearly was a part of your decision-making process of how to approach what's in front of you, where it sounded like you were moving towards a destination, but then it felt like a little bit more than a challenge than you wanted, or there's a heaviness perhaps, and then you're bending it towards a playful place. How do people know what to do with those two energies? Does creativity, can it happen in a place of challenge? Can it happen in a place of play? Does it have to be a blend of both? What advice would you give people that are trying to do something similar?
Well, I think it can be both. I could have done that. And then it was only having this time alone, which I don't get very often, and able to mull it over and think, who am I? What suits me? How do I do my self-expression? And my self-expression is about, I've got to feel it myself. So writing the memoir was perfect for this, rather than make something up like a story. I tried that during COVID, and I spent months on it. And at the end, I thought, I don't like this. I don't even like the characters. It's just because it didn't feel authentic, I suppose is the right word. And I think if it comes from me, and a lot of these little vignettes and things, they come from different areas in my life, but I might change them around a little artistic license. That
Mm.
feels more like me. So I think it's about finding out what feels congruent to you. What are you expressing yourself? Challenge is great, because I started this, I joined this singing group, And to me, singing was the scariest thing I could do. And I don't feel I got a terribly good singing voice, but I challenged myself and actually really loved it and was there, doing it every week and with other people and harmonies and things. It was great fun because you weren't just singing all by yourself. And I even joined a singing songwriting group. I challenged myself there because the actual thought of singing by myself was terrifying. But I recorded two, three songs. Each course was like 1 year long, so I know I can do it, and I can be challenged. And sometimes that's good because it's a totally different sort of experience than normal. But to actually write that, I don't need to be challenged on that in that way. I can just express myself.
And I heard
And
of
if
that.
that feels fun and that feels that's me, that's really coming from me. And it doesn't mean to say it's all much easier. It can be tricky sometimes, but other times words can just come to you and ideas can just come to you. And I think if you can get on that sort of track in a way where you allow the synchronicity to come in, then you're on the track.
Synchronicity. Okay, I want to hear a little bit more about that, but first, reflecting back on what you just shared, it sounds, what I'm hearing is this idea that creativity is a journey to yourself, that ex self-expression is finding yourself. Is synchronicity a sign that you're on the right path towards yourself?
Yes, I say absolutely. I mean, just quickly, the first book that I did where I was interviewing all these different musicians about their creativity, and I knew I was on a synchronistic path because I just needed to think of somebody and they would appear.
Hmm.
They were in town, or those it was so I knew that this was the synchronicity was definitely there. And then with this idea I've got now, the first little vignette is called The Desk. And I was with my granddaughter and we were driving along in Ojai. And I was saying, I'm not quite sure whether to write this book, this little vignette about a desk, and or I could just do a complete different story and make a story up. And as I was saying that, we literally were passing by. Someone had left a desk on the roadside, and she said, "Oh, like that, you mean?" And there was the desk. So if that wasn't a sort of like, yes, go ahead with your desk story, and just little things like that are reaffirming.
Yeah, it's like a little bit of both of those elements there where you're playing with the universe and you're also kind of giving little challenges to the universe, and then in return the universe plays with and presents challenges to you to play the game.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah.
So let's explore the next direction. What is behind you?
What I feel is behind me, I had a really nasty fall beginning of March and broke all the bones in my elbow, and and um,
Hmm.
and I just went black and blue. My whole arm, fingers were swollen up, and everything was just like really shocking. And I couldn't move it, and it was very painful, and it was really tough. And so as the months have gone by, because it takes a long time to heal bones, as the months have gone by and I can start moving my arm and I can start silly things like washing my hair, and things that I couldn't do for quite a number of months because you can't move anything. Um, well, I feel that's behind me now. I feel, when I went to had my months in LA, and I had some body work as well. And it feels like that arm is part of me now, whereas before it felt it was separate from me. And so I feel that's behind me. I feel I'm recovering, but I've got through the worst of it. I just got to build up strength now. So I feel that's behind me.
That sense of misalignment with yourself, I can see how that relates to what you're describing and what's in front of you in terms of creativity as that journey to finding yourself. So the creation being that sense of unity and then this literal breaking, being a
Mm,
disunity, did it
mm.
present you with any big lesson that you've been integrating, or was it just a broken bone?
I think it was a wake-up call. I think it was a wake-up call on many levels. And um, it was, yes, one has to be careful, one has to take care, one needs to watch where you're putting your feet and, be more mindful. Also, it was a lesson to slow down, which is an obvious one. Um, but also, I feel it's changed something where I feel I have more of a voice now. It's done something,
Really?
and yeah, it really has. And I think I'm still kind of processing that, but it feels like that was a wake up call. Like life is precious. Do what you need to do. Because my husband is quite a bit older than me. It's very easy being a sort of, to be a kind of servant to that rather than off service and taking care of him, or but also remembering that I have my um, destiny to fulfill as well. It's more of that. Doesn't mean say you don't have to be kind and caring and all those things, but to also not give up, give everything to that, that there's still a part of you that needs to have your self-expression, which is very important.
Yeah. Yeah, that there's a teacher in this moment and the perspective gained, even in an experience that can, when I talk about what's behind us, I talk about joy and anger, like even an experience that might fill us with anger because of an inconvenience like that or a pain like that, to
Mm-hmm.
to find that joy for what it's given, such as a voice, is an incredible ability for this bigger idea of self-expression, and I really want to celebrate that. And I also want to ask, what are some joys that you see when you look behind you?
Um, well, joys are definitely my life and what I talk about, when I give talks often. And it's not only, the life living in the 60s and, having been part of that whole zeitgeist, and it was very joyful and very innocent, and being, say, with my sister marrying one of the Beatles and being in India with the Beatles, or me with my husband then Mick, then he became part of Fleetwood Mac, and so I was very in the center of things and finding myself in San Francisco in 1967, and I had no idea all that was going on. And I think that I feel I've been very blessed, and there've been tough times because the 70s were pretty hardcore, and kind of, I think I lost my way a bit um, with the whole drugs and alcohol and all that stuff that rock and roll kind of comes with rock and roll. But that's why it was so great when I wrote this book about the spiritual sides of these musicians and rock and roll, and their sense of destiny and all that. So I sort of used all that. And also, having the ability and the privilege really to work in the addiction field, this place in Tucson, while I was living in England, getting people into treatment, working in the addiction field for about 20 something years, and how inspiring that was, and how amazing seeing people. You see them before when you do the assessment, and you see them after when they come back from treatment. And I take the aftercare group, and just it would bring me to tears sometimes. And I feel really privileged to have witnessed what can change when you have a sort of spiritual life, and I think the 12-step program is very spiritual. And you'd see people come back and they're so grateful that they've got another chance to lead their life.
So I love how you've set this up, because there's kind of three layers to go into here. One is the first thing you brought up is something that is a relatively tight experience, breaking your arm and then integrating that and looking back on that trial and shifting your perspective on it to basically tell a different story and see it from a new light, see it from a new context, which from what you just shared, like really sounds like it came from some of the skills you deployed as a counselor in these environments where people are doing that for larger patterns, larger past moments in their life when they're on the 12 steps. And then
Mm.
and then behind that is this incredibly rich and expansive set of experiences that have colored culture, not just your life, but culture more broadly. And I'd love to really open up and ask you, like, as time has gone on since some of these very rich moments and experience and memories, how has your perspective on some of them shifted? What did the 60s look like looking back from the 70s versus from the 80s, the 90s, et cetera, and other big moments? Have you seen the same memory and your relationship with that memory change depending on the context of a time?
Well, I think looking back on the 60s, for sure, it was a very innocent time. And, whether being a teenager is an innocent time as well, I don't know. No, I think the 60s, because it was not long after the war and people were changing. It's like there was fun was starting to happen and bright colors and, getting more in touch with fashion and what it represented. And it seemed to be tied up with music. And then I think there was a big search for I suppose one would call it sort of higher power or just finding a search for meaning in life. Then it became where everybody, or it was like a counterculture really, was searching for meaning, whether it was taking acid or smoking dope or whatever in different ways, or then as in meditation. And that's when the Maharishi came into my life and our lives in India. So there was a searching for sense of purpose. So all that I feel was going on in the 60s. And I think the 70s, with the, being with the band and then going to live in LA, and then the whole, well, say for Fleetwood Mac, the fame and taking cocaine that they were very much in need of at that time, they felt, because they had to finish their first album and they had to work all through the night, even though it meant redoing it probably the following day. All that side of the darker side, I think, came into view. And I was the only one that had little children. And so that was much more difficult to navigate. So, yes, so I think, the 60s was innocent, 70s was definitely a little bit more hardcore. And then after that, I suppose it was, I think I refound myself and wanted to, that's when I decided I needed to go to college in the 80s and came to live in LA. And I'd never been. And so talk about a challenge. That was a huge challenge. And so I went to college, and the first day that I was there, I passed out when I was meant to speak up in front of the class because
No.
I had just surrounded in this, bubble of musicians and everything that rock and roll represented. I hadn't actually stepped out of that world. And so it was quite traumatic in some ways, but then I just loved it. I loved learning. I loved the psychology. I loved all of it. And that's when things started to happen.
Hmm. Would you describe this as an orderly, winding path of, kind of drifting one way and then it sends you down the other and then sends you back the other way, kind of, left to right, or is it a totally chaotic knot of just
Well, yeah. Well, I
wandering?
think the whole thing, it was like I was a little leaf in the wind. I would just go wherever the wind was flowing, and that all seemed to work out and fine until it's funny how things happen actually. Until I'd married husband number two, who was also a drummer from England, but lived in LA, and he played with a lot of really big bands. And I remember for our honeymoon, we were in Maui and having a near drowning experience because somebody bought some magic mushrooms, synthetic ones, and I hadn't done anything like that since the 60s, but I kind of joined in and thought I could breathe underwater when I was really quite far out and in every way, and terrifying because I'd always been scared of the sea. And so I felt I could have done, and big waves are coming, and it was really horrific. And I swam back as fast as I could, hoping I wouldn't think I could breathe underwater again because I was mesmerized by all the coral and everything like that. But that was a turning point. That was another turning point where it's like, okay, now I'm ready to give back to life.
Hmm.
And so it's funny how I'm just equating these two and my elbow, that and my elbow, how in a way they sometimes something has to happen or a change to come.
Yeah. Well, it seems like you're equipped with a remarkable ability to go through an experience and then say, what was that? Why did that happen?
Mm, mm. Yeah. What does it mean?
Hmm. And
Yeah.
then process it from the cultural side of, being amongst so many artists and also from the academic side of being amongst, so many scholars. It's an
Yeah.
amazing juxtaposition.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Let's use that to explore the direction of what you rest upon, what you're made of, the soil of your life, and tell me a little bit about that.
I what I rest upon is this what I call a kind of spiritual awakening when I was about 19, I think, 18, 19. And it was this, I was alone in a room in when I was living in London, and I was a model at that time, and I'd been modeling for a few years, and um, and then I remember sitting down by myself on the floor, wondering where my life was going. You know, what is it I wanted to do, or sort of being reflective, and then suddenly I kind of felt I was in this zone where, because I was brought up very much, we would sort of had to go to church. My parents were churchgoers, and God was up in heaven and the devil was down below, and went to a Catholic boarding school at one point. And so I suddenly realized everything's a circle. It's not sort of up there or down there. It's all a circle, the sort of life of birth, death, rebirth, and I can't exactly describe it in words, but it was a feeling of I could have been sitting there for hours, or I could have been sitting there just for a few minutes. But whatever it was, I felt I was in this zone, and it was when I came out of it, I felt I'd got something deep inside me that I didn't have before. And it set me on a path to searching for other people who'd had a similar experience. And I think that has stayed with me and all these years. And it went, obviously, then it was not long after that that I was asked if I wanted to go to San Francisco and help my friend with a shop, not knowing that that's where there was a counterculture that was sort of growing there of exactly the same thing, of connecting to a deeper part of themselves. And that has that has stayed in different ways. Either I'm meditating and I'm doing the Buddhist meditation, or I was doing the transcendental meditation, or I'll just meditate very quietly and just sit by myself. But it's that the connection to a deeper part of myself is what I rest upon.
Hmm. You've been in these places and times of incredible creativity that have really changed the world. San Francisco in the 60s, London in the 60s, going to India, the ashram, and really at a time when a lot of those modalities of meditation and consciousness expansion started to come into the culture. Is there a feeling that you have, even in your body, perhaps, when you're in a place in time that is moving the rest of the world? Or is it like being in the eye of a hurricane where you might not even notice and all of the energy is swirling around it on the outside?
Yeah, it's like that. Because also when you're younger, you don't think, "Ooh, I wonder what else is going on in the world," or well, oh, this seems like a time of change, because I didn't actually read newspapers or anything like that. And a lot of stuff was just kind of undercurrent stuff. But no, that was that leaf in the wind, but it was like being directed because I would find myself in these pivotal places that when I look back on, I can reflect, be reflective about it. And it was this kind of like this zeitgeist. I was part of that represented our time.
Were there other leaves in the wind that you flew with?
No, and I think, now looking back on it, I was in a way directed to these places like San Francisco. And yes, it just so happened that I was living with Patti and George. And then they said, "Oh, would you want to come to India with us?" And met Maharishi. And so I just happened to be in those places, but I didn't think of it any more than, oh, yeah, okay, that sounds nice, or I've always wanted to go to India. And it's only when you actually experience that time, you're just fully in the moment. So you're not aware of yourself being a leaf in the wind. And I think what happened, the leaf stopped being in the wind once I went to the college and started learning about psychology and this and that. And then my life felt more directed, and working for the treatment center and knowing that I wanted to, my PhD, I knew what I wanted to do with interviewing all these musicians because I wanted to find out what the creative process was all about because I never felt creative. So then I felt that I was going in a direction. I wasn't just floating in the wind anymore.
Mm, you were getting grounded.
I was getting grounded, exactly.
That seems like such an important area to open up where in the culture of spirituality and creativity, there's a lot that's encouraging us to activate, to find enlightenment, to find our genius, to just sort of step into that light, and not as much encouragement to be grounded, to be practical, to kind of settle down a little bit. What would you say to anybody that is seeking spirituality, enlightenment, creativity today about the relationship between getting activated and getting grounded?
Ooh. Um, mm, well, I suppose I think being mindful of trying to stay in the present, I mean, that grounds you when you're aware rather than, ooh, flying off with another idea or flying off, which is all fine. But I don't know. That's a really interesting question.
Well, I think it's right there in what you shared. The spiritual teachers, they all talk about being present. And it's
Yeah,
kind of the paradox is that's where enlightenment and groundedness both reside.
that's right. And your centeredness, getting centered, that's grounding.
Let's talk about what shines upon you.
Hmm.
What's in the
What
light?
shines for me? I would say now the ability to communicate with an audience, to
Hmm.
share my life story and the interviews I did with the musicians about their creativity. Um, that to me, because it's only fairly recently, because I was terrified of speaking in public. And I think it was because I was, I would organize things like a mindfulness conference and get a lama and the psychiatrist I know from the treatment center I was working at, and different people that I knew very well, but I couldn't stand on the stage and introduce them because I knew I would forget their names and my knees would feel like jelly, and I just couldn't do that. But then once I started talking about my book, it was called It's Not Only Rock and Roll, which was the version that came out in England of the Musicians in Tune. Once I started talking about something that was really close to my heart, I could do it and feel really good about it. Because I'd never really talked much about 60s and all those sort of things that happened then. And I enjoyed it, and I realized I was connecting with the audience, and that felt so great because to me, connection has been such an important part of my life, the need to feel connected. And that's what I get when I'm communicating with the audience. And I don't think it would matter how big the audience was, because it still feels like a whole. And if somebody's asking a question, you can look at them, but you can also look at the rest of the audience. It's something that I found I can do,
Hmm.
which is, that was since 2014. I realized I can do this, and actually I'm really loving it. So that's what I feel. And I feel I have an ability to give, and to give people the information that they're asking, or they want to hear about this stuff. And that feels so nice. And yeah, I think that's what shines upon me.
Yeah, well, there's that interplay between challenge and play again,
Yeah.
where it's like the playfulness broke through the challenge when you were kind of seizing up, standing in front of a room of people, trying to say what you're supposed to. But then when you
Yeah.
started saying what you wanted to, it just
Yes.
flowed.
Yeah. And it is a play. I feel like play. I feel I'm sort of telling a few jokes and, like completely relaxed and enjoying it, and, feel we could just all be in my sitting room. It's sort of, it feels that close.
So I feel like you'd have a truly informed and remarkable perspective on this question. What happens to people when they step into a spotlight?
I think it is for most people, um, fear that they would do something stupid, and that they will get, people will see that they can't do what they thought they could do, or it's a fear of looking silly in front of people. I think that's quite pronounced.
Yeah, I can certainly feel that. We don't want to make fools of ourselves,
That's it. And be judged.
but at the same time, we want to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a tricky contrast.
Yeah. And, I think if you're fearful like that, the audience are in a way the enemy, because they're making you feel fearful. But if you embrace it, then they're your friends. And, it's like they're like one, the whole becomes like one.
When some of the, artists that you've interviewed or gotten to know, when they had a very bright spotlight on them, was there a sense that they had control over the parts of them that were seen by the world versus unseen, or
Do you mean
not?
if they're on stage, when they're on stage, of that sort of bright lights?
Well, I mean, I suppose I mean it figuratively. There's the
Yeah.
light of the stage itself, which we just examined, but let's talk about the subtle light of fame and notoriety and media attention.
Well, I think my feeling is that, going back to the stage, is that when they are on the stage, something takes over that can feel like it's bigger than them. And so they just go with it. And that's that whole kind of peak experience, the Abraham Maslow description of where things just all seem to happen together, and you're not even the pilot anymore. It just kind of takes off. But I think when they're in their private lives, I think it's quite different, and they're just like anybody else. that I think happy to just be who they are.
Okay, well,
I don't know
that's
if I'm
very
answering
interesting
very well.
because there's something about today where with social media, it's as though people's private lives are part of the stage. And even if they're putting the lights on by filming and posting what's happening in their day-to-day lives, it's not quite that peak experience that they're having when they're filming their lunch, right? So,
Right.
what is the effect of something like that on people that are in the spotlight 24/7, both in their peak experience moments and in their mundane moments?
Yeah, but I mean, if they're on social media, then they obviously have something to say, or they have need to be seen, or there's, that's something that they can choose for themselves,
Right.
surely.
It's about the honesty.
Yeah.
And clearly there's an appetite for that, for people to see that.
Mm.
How do you think that affects the experience of the artist? Does that foster more creativity or less?
What, putting themselves on social media?
Having your art being in a focused spotlight on a stage in front of a crowd and then being able to go back to your private life afterwards versus having a more subtle spotlight on you all the time.
Well, I think that I'm sure a lot of musicians, and I think some of them actually talk about it, if they've had a really big hit record, and then there comes that feeling of, God, now I've got to sort of even do better than that. I've got something I've got to really try and make even more brilliant. And I think that they've felt that's a mistake, because then it's something that comes from your mental part of you. I've got to do this or I've got to do that to look
The
good, and
challenge.
more ego, but it's a kind of like an ego too, rather than just sit back and just see what comes out, just see what inspires them. Just you know, be open to whatever's around them, to grab things. It's
It comes
like
back.
Don Henley saying that, he was looking for the end of, what was it? Boys of Summer, maybe it was, that song of his. And there's one line, dead head sticker on a Cadillac. Well, he was literally just driving along thinking, what's my last line? What's my last line? And there he saw this deadhead sticker on the Cadillac just in front of him. So it's that thing of just keeping your eyes open and, being aware and picking things up rather than trying to compete with what you've already done.
Mm, mm. Heads up rather than heads down. And
Yeah,
it really comes
yeah,
from that dichotomy, which has sort of been the key in this whole conversation between challenge and play. You
yes.
you have a hit and does it create the sense of pressure and challenge that then is too much and then it stifles that creativity. And then I think similarly or inversely, what I'm hearing in your perspective there is that even something that's such a difference maker as social media and being in the spotlight all the time, if it's playful, then it's very fertile for creativity. And so
Yeah,
I love that I presented this kind of dichotomy to you of focused fame that preserves a private life versus broader fame of sharing your private life. And I asked you if one is more creative than the other, and you're like, neither. It's about whether or not you maintain a sense of play in your creative process. Is that a fair
yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah. You
beautiful?
get the joy, there's that side as well.
So let's move to another direction. What do you receive?
But I think what I receive is sort of a little bit like the previous answer to the previous question, is a sense of well-being, an opportunity to communicate with others about such an important, such an enormous part of our lives. And I suppose that's what I receive, is that I can be in a position where I can share it, and for people to respond in a way, I suppose. I feel this sense, and it's like a sense of just well-being.
How do you discern the
Yeah.
difference between signal and noise?
Signal and noise.
Hmm.
I'm not sure how you mean.
You mentioned something earlier about when you were in these places and times,
Yeah.
you weren't really reading the newspaper. You were just kind of present. You were just kind of there.
Right. Right.
And is that because of some instinct for being smart about your information diet, or being savvy about your influences? Was it maybe not even that purposeful? But all of it is to open up this question of, as creators, we kind of we exhale what we inhale. What we kind of bring
Yes.
in informs what we're going to give out, and some of that is signal. Some of it is really relevant to the stories that we want to tell, the creations that we want to make, but some of it is kind of waste. Some of it, I suppose I think some of it is kind of waste. Some of it is distraction, but perhaps I'm wrong. But that's what I want to hear from you is,
Yeah.
how do
I
you look at
think,
that?
yeah, I think that not reading a newspaper at 17, 18, or really seeing what's going on the outside was because I just went with whatever was in my gut, whatever I'd see friends, or I'd love to dance, or it was very much immersed in my world where I wasn't interested in, who the prime minister was, or, not quite that bad, but, it's just, I was enjoying being a teenager. And yes, I'd hear about the riots in Paris in 1967, but didn't really take much notice. I was much more internal. I was on my search, I was searching for meaning. I was searching for what is God. I was very, very serious in that way. Although, I enjoyed, had fun and stuff, but I was a very serious teenager because I was always searching for what the answer was. And why are we here, or what am I meant to be doing, or those kind of questions. And at that time, then a song would come out, say it was Dylan, or say the Beatles, All You Need Is Love. That's like, oh, that's a relief. All we need is love. I don't need to be questioning what is God, what is, and I wouldn't even allow myself, I thought of this the other day, I wouldn't even allow myself to read any novels. The only things I would allow myself to read were spiritual books and books about Buddhism, or
Hmm.
Yogananda, or things that were, I was just very sort of, just this search was so deep.
And it was very focused, it sounds like, that there was a really there was a was it a phase of info gathering, of being a seeker and focusing on that for all that you take in?
No, that's what I mean, that I think it just stuck with me. It's that the search wasn't so intense. Um, After a while. I think, when I started learning to do meditation in India, and we were there, just seeing how amazing that made you feel, and you didn't need to sort of, smoke weed, or you didn't need to do anything other than that, because that could get you there.
Well, so there's something here that ties into the next question, and I kind of want to bridge them a little bit between what you receive and what you give, because there's I'm piecing together. So you mentioned this spiritual awakening when you were about 19, and then you're in these places, like London and San Francisco in the 60s, and these experiences where the culture is continuing and you're a part of it in the 70s. And then around the 80s or the 90s or so, you began to speak and write. And then actually, this is where we're transitioning into what you give. You're beginning to create material, and you have this corpus of recordings and interviews and tapes with musicians about their creative process, and you followed a bit of synchronicity in terms of who to interview for the book or whatnot. And you also have your life stories that went into your memoir for another book. And I'm interested in that selection process, if it even was, if that's the right word to call it a selection process, when you're deciding what to put into a work that you're going to put out. How did you decide what memories or what interviews to keep versus to leave out?
Hmm. Well, the interviews, I think I only left one out, and but I did all the interviews, and I would just think, God, I would really like to get Ravi Shankar, and then someone would say, oh, he's actually staying in a hotel in Santa Monica, or so it was, and I can't even remember how I got the Blues, BB King, all those, because how did I get them? It was almost like it was just so word of mouth. So I know him, or somebody coming up with it, or someone's brother knows somebody. So that's how that came about. And that was what I called synchronistic, because that's just exactly the sort of person I wanted in this book. But choosing, say, the memoir, there were some bits that I thought I was going to put in, and there were some bits I thought I might take out, but I actually did take out the bits I thought I was going to put in, and I left the bits that were really, really tricky to write and really hard to go through. And it became a sort of therapy to really face some of the sort of difficult times. And so somehow, but I also knew I had to get this out. Even if there were publishers that dismissed it or didn't want it or whatever, I kept asking myself, well, what's keeping me going? And it was like I had to keep going. There was no other choice. And I think that's when it grabs you, and you don't have a choice.
So it's kind of like on both sides of the equation here. You followed where the energy took you.
Yeah,
Didn't really
yeah.
force anything, just followed where the energy took you. And there's an honesty in that.
Yeah, yeah. It was like being very honest and saying, this is who I am. This is what I experienced, and this is who I am. And that's it. Hopefully someone will be inspired, or because I love to be inspired. And if I can sort of do anything that would inspire somebody, that would give me tremendous joy.
Is there anything more that you would like to share about that question? What do you give?
Um, No, it's a difficult one because you often don't realize you're giving it. It's only the response that you realize, gosh, that person really got something from that. So sometimes you don't know what you're giving, and how it's being taken.
Well, that's incredibly wise. I think we can let that sit. And let's take it to the seventh direction here. And let me ask you, what's in your heart?
My love for my family, my friends, nature, compassion, joy, the love of truth is in my heart. And probably lots more, but those are the things that I thought of.
Brilliant. Jenny Boyd, is there anything else you'd like to share?
No, except Will, thank you. It's been a great interview. And it's been really nice meeting you when I was in LA just recently. And I just feel very lucky for the people in my life. And you're one of them.
Hmm. Very grateful to have met you. Thank you.